Welcome everybody. We're back. We're back starting in 2021 and glad to see that you have enlisted and showing up. Today in our webinar we have Arend-Jan Kauffmann. He has, actually I more or less virtually grabbed him by his shirt and said, okay, this is a nice topic. There was a kind of discussion on Twitter on using, actually was related to a blog post of Arend-Jan, and somebody asked about using Postman, etc. And then I said this would be a nice presentation for Areopa, and Arend-Jan stepped in just like that. There was no, I don't think there was even a delay in your answer, Arend-Jan. So I'm very happy to have you here today. And as you can read the title, let's talk about tools to test APIs. So Arend-Jan will show you what tools he's using and why one or the other. The 28th webinar already. And yes, we keep on continuing also this year, although there's no program yet for the rest, but I'm working on it. I'm trying to grab those people that have been preparing or suggesting topics for Dynamics Con and might not be elected, voted for. Before we go and hand off to Arend-Jan, of course, good day, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Happy to have you on our webinar again. For those that have not been on our webinars before, we have a number of housekeeping rules. Your mic is muted and you cannot unmute it. The way we interact with you is by means of the question window. If you have questions, and please come up with your questions, don't hesitate. Write them down, and me, Luc van Vugt, I will be the moderator and I will pick them up. Arend-Jan and I discussed and agreed that I will step in with the question when it fits, when it comes up and it fits to the topic at the moment. There's no specific intervals where we will stop for questions. Just post your questions and we'll I will pick them up. So that's one part. Of course, the recording will be on our channel. As you can see, we have quite a number already. There are even more. 27, all the 27 previous sessions are there. So feel free to go there and use it to whatever you need to share it with your colleagues. Feel free to do that. And if you want to be in the know and are not yet subscribed to our newsletter, well, this is luckily not a too long URL. It's not that descriptive, but you will find it on the recording, and maybe you have a pencil and a paper to write it down quickly. Feel welcome to subscribe to that. Yes, normally I would have a list of upcoming webinars, but there's nothing planned at the moment. I took a break also around Christmas time, and I thought, well, normally I always get some topics, and maybe it's nicer for you to know upfront a couple of weeks already, but this time probably I will find one next week or whatever. I'll inform you through the newsletter. If you have anybody or have a suggestion of a topic which you would like to get addressed, please ping me on Twitter or on by sending a mail, wherever you want, as a comment to one of the Areopa recordings. So feel free to suggest that. And before I hand off to Arend-Jan, as always, I want to thank our supporter for NAV that allows us to use their GoToWebinar and get this going. So Arend-Jan, I'm going to make you presenter, and it's up to you to share your screen and have fun.
Alrighty, let's see which screen is he going to pick. Show my screen. You should now be seeing my VSCode screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, welcome everybody. And like Luc mentioned, it was this came from a Twitter conversation where somebody said, well, it could be an idea to get a crash course in Postman, and then another said, well, but I'm using REST client, it's way better. And then somebody else said, well, I think it was Steve Endo, he said, well, it would be an idea if we can compare them. And then I said, well, that might be an idea for a session for Areopa. And I, of course, knew that Luc would step in, no doubt about that. So I knew what I was doing. Actually, I was just inviting myself to do this.
It was a score, an easy score.
Yeah, you didn't let me down there, Luc. Okay, so I said also in the description that I do not have and did not prepare any PowerPoint. I hope you don't mind, because we're going to talk about the two different tools, REST Client and Postman. And well, I can of course draw up some PowerPoints that list all the features. But you know what? If you want to see those features, you can read them for yourself. What I want to do is to demonstrate them, so you can really see them in action. Now, if you want to read everything around the REST client, I can only recommend you to go in VSCode, and the REST client can be found by in the extensions, and then you type in REST client, you will find that one, REST client for Visual Studio Code, and here you have a detailed description of all the features that are in the REST client. What can it do, and how does it work? And if you have more questions around that, there is a repository on GitHub with a lot of questions, issues asked. How does this work? How does that work? Here I have a bug, etc. But you can just read and follow. And yeah, you know, I can only say, if you really want to use this tool, want to get used to it, you should try things out, read here, and in that way you are just following what I was doing by learning the REST client. Okay, so the REST client, I will start with that one, and then we move on to Postman. The REST client is a tool in Visual Studio Code, and based on the number of downloads, quite a favorite tool for many. It's a tool to do REST calls. Well, actually, not only REST calls. No, OData is a REST call, is a REST endpoint, but it can also do GraphQL queries. And GraphQL queries are definitely not REST APIs. The main difference between REST APIs and GraphQL is that a REST API but has every single resource in the API does have its own unique URL. And we know that, I mean, if you call a Business Central API, every single record has its own URL based on the ID of that record. That's not the case with GraphQL. GraphQL just works with one endpoint, and you send a query to that endpoint. That query looks a little bit like JSON, but it's actually not JSON, but you get JSON back. And in the query, you say what you want to retrieve. GraphQL, by the way, has been developed in the past by Facebook, became a standard, is used by big companies, also by Twitter, for example, but also by Shopify and many others. And actually, I'm currently looking into enabling GraphQL for Business Central, but that's another story for another time. So the REST client, we use the REST client to test Business Central APIs. And let me close this one. I do have a repository open here, a workspace open. And in this workspace, I have a couple of custom APIs, but I want just to start with, excuse me, just to start with the basics of working with the REST client. The REST client, it works with files that end with .http. And let me just create a simple example, demo.http. Now, the HTTP file enables the REST client, and you can just simply type in the command that you want. Do you want to have a get, or do you want to do a post, or is it a delete or a patch? And then you type in the URL. I mean, we can just do get google.com. Then on top of that link that you type in, of this command, you see a send request. That is a button that is coming from the code lens in Visual Studio Code. This is similar to what you see with a number of references in AL on top of a variable or a function. Now, if you do not have code lens enabled, then you don't see the send request. So if I switch that off and I do it like this, then you don't see anything. And I have this toggle thingy here to quickly do that. But you see here on the bottom, editor.codelens is changed. If I go to my settings and I find here code lens, here it is, controls whether the editor shows code lens. If you have that disabled, and many people have it disabled because of it slows down Visual Studio Code, especially when you have big apps, or maybe you have the base app open or whatever. But now you don't have that link, so you cannot do anything. So that's why I have that setting, of course, enabled. And that's also why I have this tool here. I don't go into settings and then find code lens and then enable it. I have a very simple extension installed. It's called the toggle. And I think I can show that one here as well. That is setting toggle. And that one creates this button over here, and then in my settings, it's a one-time setting. If I look here, toggle, I say that the setting 1, this here, the setting 1 is the editor code lens, and now setting 1 title is a little bit strange, background code analysis, anyway. And the state 1 is true. That's the default. So with the setting, I say, well, I want to switch code lens on and off. And that is quite easy, because now in AL, I can decide to not have code lens enabled, because that speeds up the total experience, the performance. But now I really need it. Now, you can click on that send request, and then you get the result. And the result, as you see it here, is, well, we have here the request, and here we have the result in the right-hand side. That's a new pane, a new window that opens. It does not open in a new tab like this, but it really opens to the side. So you keep your request here, and you see the response here. Now, this, of course, is HTML that you see here. We have no idea what it means, but it's just to show you that you can do basically anything that you do in a browser. You get a URL. Now, here you see in the top the status of the response, followed by the headers of the response, followed by the white line, and then the body of the response. Now, sometimes you're not really interested in all the headers, and you can change the setting what you want to see from the response. And that is in the settings in a REST client. You can search it like this, and then scroll a little bit down, and then find. And I need to switch to workspace. By the way, there I have set it, and here we have the REST client preview option. This is the option that defines what you are going to see in the response. By default, you have full, but full means that it's going to show you the response headers, the body, and a status line in the top. Now, if you are only interested in the headers, the response headers and the status line, you change it to headers, do the call again, and you only see the status and the headers. If you are not interested in the headers, but only in the body, you change this to body, and you do send request, and you don't see any headers or a status. So this also hides the status. Now, if you think, yeah, but wait a second, I want to see the complete request and response, both, then you change it to exchange, which will demonstrate, show you the request and the response, both. And now I see that the request that is done not is just get and then the address, but it has added two headers in the two request headers that I didn't know about, but apparently he decides to add a user agent header, which is quite common, of course. And then a couple of white lines, and then we get the headers, and then finally under the headers and the status, of course, and then underneath we get the body. So that is a setting where we can control what we get back. And usually I have this set to exchange because I want to see everything. I want to see what did you send. I want to see what do I get back. The reason for having exchange is not because I want this just have repeated over here, but when you are using variables, and I will come to that, of course, then you want to see how what variables were filled in. You want to see the complete URL with all variables, with all values that were used to do the request. So this is, of course, a very simple request to google.com. Let's quickly switch to a real API, and I'm going to use my local, not this API, I'm going to use my local bcsandbox.docker.local 748 and then bc/API/v2.0. That is the base URL that we are going to use. Now, this is, of course, my local sandbox, the port number, the server instance, and then API/v2. Now, when I do send request, of course, I get unauthorized. I need to authorize. So how does that work in the REST client? You have to add the authorization header. Now, the authorization header for your local environments, the most simple thing you can do here is use username and password authentication. So that means basic authentication. That is something you need to type in, basic, followed by 3 different options. Officially, the header authorization basic header requires you to take the username and a password in this format, and then base64 encode this value. So if I would do that, I would every time need to get the base64 encoded value of my username and password. And you can, of course, do so. You can go to base64encode.org.com or whatever site there is to do base64 encoding. Type in a username, colon, password, get the base64 value, paste it in here, you're ready. You can also do here, instead of this username, password, you can just type in username, password as in real values, like this. If I would do this, you will see that he is not really showing it me that he was, I was expecting him to do so, but anyway, he will underwater automatically encode this to base64. And what we can also do is do without a colon, just as username and a password, and do this. And well, let's now type in some real stuff. This is my username and password that I'm using, and set a request, and poof, there we go. We have some data. So this is quite an easy way of doing authentication. And for local, of course, I could use my web service access key, but I'm not doing that because every new sandbox that I create, I have a different web service access key. This is all local, so I don't care if anybody else sees my my password that I'm using for my local Docker containers. You're welcome to try it out on my my other accounts. But you know, all my Docker containers that I have use this same password. So all my APIs can be configured in exactly the same way. So with this, we get some data. You see here the list of APIs that are available. Now, then we can continue to expand the API and do something like this, get a list of companies, and then say, okay, now I want to get just one company. So we add it to the end here. So now we have one company, and finally find the items, for example, or customers or vendors or whatever we want. So, well, that's it. That's how the REST client works. There's of course more, because this is not really flying. Every time you do this, you need to build up it in this way, and come on, you can't be serious. There's a better way to work with this. We can create multiple requests just in one file. Multiple requests are divided by minimum 3 hashtags, but I'm used to have more. That's a little bit more visible to me. And then I copy just this, and I say, here we go. And now I do companies, and then I have 2 requests, and now I can build it up like this. And you know, let's take another copy, and then I say this, and I know this is my current value for the current company, and I say this, give me all items, and you know what, also give me the customers, like this. So I have multiple multiple API calls here just in one file. Now, of course, this is now a hard-coded value, and my username is hard-coded, and my password is hard-coded and repeated every time, and needs to be repeated every time. That is actually not very nice, of course. What we can do is we can use variables. We can declare variables over here, like this username, oops, not with the brackets, username equals admin, and password equals that one. Now I can replace this with username, oops, not the double, like this, username and password. And there we go. Now we see that it's just working, and I can of course now replace that on all the lines here, and that is way better. Okay, so done that, configured it. We can of course do the same with the companies. We could, for example, say, okay, I want to have a company ID, and when I do this, I copy here the company ID, and then paste it in here, and everywhere else where I have this value, I change this to company ID. And you see the variables are indicated with double curly brackets. So there we are. Well, this is a way, but you know what? Now we have the value in the top here, and that company ID, it's going to change with every new sandbox that you create, every new Docker container that you create. What is a better way to do this is to name your your request and then use the response value. And this is a more advanced usage of the REST client. So I call this one companies. That means that this request is now named companies. And the format for that is hashtag and then @name and then companies. So it's a little bit different from this here. And then here, after this, after that request, I can just in another piece, I can say that my company ID should be, and now coming from companies. This request or this whole request here is now a complete variable. Look at that, companies dot response dot body. And now I need to find the company, and I usually take the first one. So what I want to have is the value. That's the first one here. I want to have the first value because it's an array. So I do this dot ID. And guess what? Our company ID now is that value that you see here. And look at that. If I take number 1 here, the second, then company ID is the second one that you see here. So with naming a request, giving a request a name, I can in my subsequent calls automatically take those values. So I'm kind of building up a story here. I can send this request, get it, the variable out of it, that the value that I need for my subsequent requests, and then call the next request. And I can do the same here with items. Let's say I want to call this items, and I want to have the first item that is returned. Then I do exactly the same and say I want to have a variable item ID, and you're going to be items. Oops, I always have the problem with the curly brackets. Items, I want you to be from the response, and then body, I'm using tab here to get to the next one, and then the value, first value, and then the ID, and send request, and now my item ID should be the first value, the first one here of the attendance desk. And then I can use that one again in the next one. I can do so with customers. I can build up a complete set of variables that I need in all my next calls to build up, for example, maybe I want to create a sales order, and then I need items, I need a customer ID, etc. So that will be pretty easy. Let's do that to finish this demo. I'm going to call this one customers, and then here it's just copy that one again, and say customer ID is going to be, and first I need to run it one time, and then he recognizes it. It's going to be customers. Come on. No, response. Okay. Thank you so much. Response, body, and then value ID. And now I could, for example, say I want to create a new sales order. It's going to be post, bcsandbox, this companies, oops, go away. Companies, company ID. Okay, you give me the brackets, please. There we go. Slash sales orders. Let's first do the get. See that we have the correct URL. You see, bad request. I made a mistake somewhere. What am I doing wrong here? Let's just take this one and this should work. There we go. And now instead of doing a get, I want to create one. So let me just grab one example here. Not going to take the whole one, of course, but now I can say it's going to be a post, and my body will look like this. And I'm going to delete a lot of this body, by the way. I want to have the customer ID. That is the one that I have, and the rest can go away. This, and here I want to have the customer ID as a variable. And if I post something, I always have to tell him the content type in the header. So there's going to be application JSON, send request, and I get back a created. I see here the filled in customer ID, and the URL, I see the company ID that comes from the variable, and I get a new sales order, which I could again get in a variable, etc. So you build up a complete story. Now, so variables are quite useful, powerful, and with your HTTP file, you build up well, basically the whole flow of how your external application should work in first getting a company, then getting an item ID, getting a customer ID, etc. Okay, so now I'm working against this endpoint. What if we change that tool and say, hey, we want to have a base URL? So that's what I'm going to do here, base URL, and the base URL is going to be this here. I put it here, and then I can say base URL. And of course, this would work as well. Hey, this makes sense because if we do it like this, we can now easily switch to we can easily switch to online, maybe. I only have to change the base URL. Yeah, but not only the base URL, you also have to change the username and to change the password. So if you want to switch, you probably are going to build up something like create one variable with the base URL, and this should work, and say, okay, this is now my base URL. And you may think, okay, but I have another one that is called base URL cloud, which is going to be HTTPS api.businesscentral.dynamics.com/ and I just take my own tenant here and my environment. Of course, don't forget about the v2.0, and this is the base URL for the cloud. But hey, if I do that, I also need something username cloud equals, in my case, AJ, and I have a password cloud. You see where this one is going, right? And then my web service access key that I get from the cloud. And then here I have the username for local, and maybe finally I say, well, I want to switch this to my other variable. What I want to say is, don't do it like this. Instead, what I can do is just remove all of that. And here you see bcsandbox in the bottom. And I have defined some client environments. I can switch to the cloud and see that my base URL, my username, and my password are different. And it will just work. And I can now see that my companies is definitely different from what I just had. So how does that work? Where does that come from? Because I'm now working with the cloud, and when I go back to bcsandbox, I get back this URL. Now, this is coming from the settings file, and in the settings file, I have defined the environment variables. I have defined nothing in shared, that is shared amongst environments, but I have defined here different environments. bcsandbox, the other one is called bcsandbox master, it's for the next version. I have one for the cloud, so now everybody knows my web service access key, so go and get access to my demo environment. I will, of course, delete this one afterwards. Anyway, and I only have to specify here the username, password, and base URL, and then here I can switch between those environments and then automatically switch those values. So benefit is that I don't have to put them into my HTTP file. I can share them with others. It could even contain confidential information, blah, blah, blah. This is an easier way to work with the REST client. Finally, a question that you may have is, hey, if you are doing this against the cloud and you're using the web service access key, can you also do Azure Active Directory authentication, OAuth authentication? And the answer is yes, it should be possible, but at this moment there is a bug. So you wouldn't have the base URL /API/v2.0, and then authorization would be bearer token, and then you have the this one here. Now, this AAD-v2 token is not going to work out of the box. If you do this, it will say to me, you're unauthorized. And the reason is that that token that I get here is not correct. And I could say I want to have a new token. He should then say, hey, do you want to log in? And this code, you recognize this from AL. All fine, but you know, this is not going to work. The problem is that he does not use the correct scope. I need to add a scope like this, api.businesscentral.dynamics.com/user impersonation. And then he should request for a new token with this scope. But now we get an error message. Well, today we don't. That's funny. Let me see. I can now log in here. No. I need to paste in. Next. There we go. You have signed in. Done. Are you kidding me? No, not right. So that there is a bug in that scope that it's just not working 100% correct, and they're working on it. I mean, we have to wait for the REST client author to fix this. Okay, so enough about the REST client. Let's switch to Postman, because Postman is I would say a totally different tool than the REST client. We can do the same with Postman, simply do calls to Business Central. So in Postman, I can just type in https bcsandbox.docker.local 7048/bc/API-v2.0 and try to get something, and it says you are not authorized. You bet, because it didn't specify any username, password. And there's the first difference. We need to specify authorization just in a tab. We're not using the headers directly. Well, we could specify here authorization but then we definitely need to type in basic followed by the base 64 and go to value. That's not needed. We can go to the authorization tab and say we want to have basic authentication, and then type in here admin and type that password, and then send, and then we get in the bottom the response of this this call. So as far as this, it's quite similar to the REST client, but now to the differences. The Postman, it can be a little bit overwhelming if you see that for the first time, I have to admit. But the thing with Postman is that you can save your requests under collections. And that is what I do here. You see here a number of collections, and in the collections I have saved under different folders all my different requests that I've collected over time. And you know, this here is a set of calls. I have this API calls. I have a call to get companies. I have a call to get GL accounts, etc., etc. In this way, I can quickly navigate through the different requests. And as you can imagine, that goes a little bit faster compared to a long file here, where, well, you have to build this up. And of course, you can say, I'm going to give this a name and a title, or maybe, well, I don't know, big headers. But you need to scroll down. There's no way to directly pick up one of those requests. Another thing that you will notice is that we have here the different tabs. Every call, every request gets its own tab, and I can switch between them. If I want to see the GL accounts, I get this list here. I will come back to the variables, of course, but I can go back to this one here, and I still see the result, the previous result. That is not possible with the REST client. It does not save your previous results, which is, in my opinion, a big win for Postman. Postman has the possibility to save your request with a name under a collection. What is more, of course, Postman also works with variables. And variables are available on different levels. We have variables that are global, which can be used anywhere. We can set variables on a collection level. And you see that here under the three dots, I can say edit the collection, and here I have variables, and here I can type variables, and I can give them an initial value. They can be changed during the calls to another value, but the next time you reset this, they will have the initial value. And then I can use those variables with in the same way as the REST client with double curly brackets. All right, that is on collection level, and the variables that you have in one collection can be used by any of those requests. Now, we have also something that is called environments. This one here, URL, is my base URL, and I can switch to another environment. It does not change the request itself. It does not change anything here, but it changes the first part of the URL. And environments are defined over here. I have three different environments here, basically two, the other is a template. I have the bcsandbox and my cloud demo environment. And this environment, it also contains variables. Basically, an environment is just a list of variables. If I click on it, I get a huge list of variables that I have collected over time. And you see here the same variables that you have seen with the REST client. The big advantage here is that I can easily switch between environments and then get the same variables. Of course, every environment then needs to have the same variables, but with different values. And that makes a lot of sense because in my environment, I collect the variables, the values that are different between the different environments, like a local environment or an online environment. So here, if I look in this one, and you can have a quick look over here, you see that my URL is api.bcsandbox.com, but here for the VC Sandbox, it's going to be my local URL and a different username and a different password. So that way works pretty simple, and these variables can are different for every environment, while the variables you have here under the collection will apply to each environment because they apply on collection level. Now, that is a little bit overwhelming maybe, because you think, okay, when do I use what? And in case of Business Central, my recommendation is when you use IDs, then store them in in environment variables, because those IDs, they are different in every single company, in every single database. So you need to store them in the environment and not in your collection, because then you can easily switch. So what if I want to call, well, here the company ID was already filled in, but what if let me go here and go to my sandbox and I say reset all. So I have no values at all, no company ID, only the URL, the user and the password do have an initial value, so the current value is the same as the initial value. How does that work? If I now do this call here, I will get an error message saying, hey, companies refers to a collection, blah, blah, blah. My company ID is empty. It has no value. What is it going to send? Is it going to complain? No. Postman is not going to complain. You can click here on code and you can see and inspect what is the URL that he's going to send. I usually click here on HTTP and I can see that he's going to send something to an empty value, companies with no value. So apparently my company ID has no value. How do I store that value? And that can be done here in this way. I go to the company's request, and then I can select this one here and set on environment BC Sandbox, click on company ID, and now this one has a value, and send it. And now it works. Now that what I just did is what you will see most people doing when working with Postman. They select the value, right click on it, and then set it to the variable in the environment that they want. Now, if you're like me and every time you do this and you find yourself always taking the first value, for example, then there is even a better way. Let me reset this one to the top, reset all, update, close, send it. Look at that. Company ID now has a value after I did a call. How does that work? I have here some JavaScript code. The JavaScript code that takes the response, postman.response, put that to a JSON object. So I get this response here in JSON. And then I say Postman environment, that's my current environment, BC Sandbox, set a variable company ID to be JSON, first value, and then the ID. This is basically the same as what you saw me doing here in this one, body value ID, storing it in a variable company ID, but also automatically. Now, in this way, I only have to call company one time. I can send it. And then the benefit of Postman, if I close Postman and reopen it, it still has that value. So I don't have to run the company's query again. You need to do that with the REST client every time because it does not persist any variable value in between. But for my local environments and also for online, of course, I only have to reset the values when I have created a new company or new environment. Only then. And if I don't, all my variables will still be stored here, and I don't have to run all those queries again and again every time I open Postman.
AJ, I don't know if you have an eye on time. There's 10 minutes to go. There are no questions, so you have the floor for 10 minutes.
All right. Well, I've just covered the basics of Postman. What I wanted to tell is that it is easy to share Postman with others, with other people in your team. I'm here working with my workspace, which is a personal workspace linked to my account. I can create multiple workspaces, so you could have, for example, a workspace per customer, and you have a team workspace. So in a company, it would be possible to share the calls with others who are belonging to the same team. You know, everything is online with Postman. Tell you what, here I have Postman in the browser, exactly the same calls. And so just to demonstrate that everything is really online. So let me get companies here again, send it, I get a value. Look at that. By the way, I'm running bcsandbox here. So my URL is my local URL. I'm running in a browser, but I still can contact my local Docker container. And that's because this one is using the browser agent. So I have allowed Postman to do calls from the browser. It's not doing this from the server. Now, the funny thing is that everything here is available for me only, but I can have team workspaces. I can create a workspace here, which then is to be shared with other people in my team. And I can share that with colleagues, work with them together. So that makes a lot of sense. The only thing is it's free for up to 5 people. If you want to have more in a team, you need to buy a paid version of Postman. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that it's quite easy to share them by exporting them. You can just say export a complete collection, keep this default value, you export it, it's becoming a JSON, and then you send it to somebody, they can import it, they drag the file into it, and they have the collection that you just sent to them. Or maybe you want to give them the complete environment. So I go here and I can say download environment. It will save it in a folder. It's now in my temp folder here. And then somebody else can say import, drag the environment file into it. Don't think, yeah, I can do that right away. And let me see where it is. A JSON environment here. Yeah, well, it should work. Why is he not going to do this? There we go. And now it says, okay, I just noted that you have an environment that you want to import. I can import it. It already exists, so I can't do it. But in that way, you can easily share collections, environments with other people. Actually, that's what I'm doing when I share these collections in the API online training that I'm delivering. And then I just export those collections and environments and give them away. So that is the basic pieces of Postman. There's a lot more actually with Postman. I can recommend you to, if you want to know more, there are some learning.postman.com documents. For example, working with variables is very useful. It explains the scopes of the variables and how to set them. The test script examples, you can do a lot more than just set some variables. You can also test your script or test your response, saying, hey, I expect that I get back a response code equal to 200. Let me show you one example here. In this one, I have some tests. And I say, when I call the API endpoint, I expect that in the response, I have at least something that is called customers and customer payment journals. And I expect to have a total of at least 48 endpoints. So when I call this one here and I click then on test results, I see, yes, a pass and here a pass, but here I see a fail because he found 56 and not 48. Well, the string apparently was wrong. This should be 48. And what's more, I have also a console.log here with a count. Let me give that like this, count, and then send. And here on console, there we go. He says count 56. So from my test, I can put some data in a console. I can have test results over here. And you can imagine that in this way, you can build up complete tests with your APIs. And I can definitely recommend you to read this blog about testing your APIs, because then you can get something like this here. Have a check if all your APIs are still up and running, if they pass everything, if the content type, the status coders are correct. You can have monitoring, etc., etc. Talking about automated testing, Luc, you must like this.
I all of a sudden woke up.
Okay, was it boring?
I had to wait for an hour.
All right, so final thing that I want to say is Postman is really flexible. I only talked about creating requests, but you can also create APIs, publish APIs, mock APIs, and do stuff like that. But that is actually not something that I have looked into. I never had a need for it, but there's a lot more possible with Postman. So for me, Postman is the winner. I used REST Client. I use that a lot for quick and dirty testing, but when I need to save the results, when I need to redo the testing, when it comes to multiple APIs, I always switch to Postman, create a collection, and use it there. That is what I do on a daily basis. Okay, are there any questions, Luc?
Yeah, there have. Dan Rai has put 2 questions to you. Can we get the web key using code? That is the
no,
first
you
question.
Can't.
Okay.
No, only the user can show its own web service access code because it acts as a password for that user, as a web service password. So only the user can view its own web service access key.
Clear. Second question, I was trying to use web service management code units, get web service URL function, but that code unit is not visible. It just displays the object name and ID and 2 braces only. What should be done in this case? Does that ring a bell?
Yes, I think what he is talking about is this one here. Let's go to the web services page. And then here, probably what he's talking about is, it should go up here. With the code units, you don't see a URL. You get a go-microsoft.com link. Maybe he's talking about that. Because a code unit does not have a single URL. Code units do have multiple URLs if they are posted as a web service. Every function in the code unit gets its own unique URL. So it cannot be displayed here. Maybe he was talking about that.
No, he's talking about from VSCode, he says.
About, sorry, say again?
Looking at the code in VSCode. And he says there's nothing in that code unit. So it's the code part. But I think that's the case with things in the system layer, isn't it? In the system application, that code is not accessible. I think that's the case.
Oh, okay. The code unit itself. Ah, okay. The web service management code unit. Yeah, if you're looking for that one and it is part of the system application layer, then you should go to AL app extensions, and there probably you will have web service management. I'm not sure. Maybe it's here. Web service management. Here we are, and here you will find the source code. And here we have the web service management implementation code unit. And here's the source code you're looking for.
Yeah, clear. Actually, that were the 2 questions. A couple of remarks, like a real great session. David says I have some time to watch the video again and really get all the points. I think it was a very clear and sound presentation, Arend-Jan. Thank you very much. And Danny Hellemans asked you to contact him on the GraphQL, but that's just a note for you. We're a little bit over time, and you said you would have 30 minutes to tell something. You gave a great presentation. Thanks very much, Arend-Jan. We're going to close down. People are moving out, and I will put the recording on the on our channel again tonight. Well, we'll have, of course, our DDC evening tonight, but I will do my best to get it on YouTube tonight. Arend-Jan, once again, thank you very much. And all the people that are still here, thank you very much for being here. And we'll meet in one of the next webinars. Bye for now.
Super. Thank you, Luc. Bye-bye.